So I have definitely learned to just kind of relax into it. Not everything is going to go the way I planned or on my schedule. And I just have to accept that. We are not going to travel in bad weather just because there's someplace we want to be or something we're trying to get to. And that's what we encourage all loopers to do. So, for somebody who has kind of lived by the clock, it is, a little bit different to try and just, as I said, kind of breathe into it and accept the fact that I don't ultimately have control over how this day is going to go. It's also, I have a team of 4 that work with me. We are all remote now. At one time, we were all in our office outside of Charleston. One of our team members moved to Phoenix and still is part of the team. One moved to Wisconsin and is still part of the team. And the 4th is still in Charleston. But
So
so we were
virtual.
operating remotely and virtually anyway. But it's, I try as a women business owner, I try to hold myself to a pretty high standard with my team. That was a little bit more challenging because we're looping. So we have great technology. We have Starlink that keeps us connected. Starlink does not always work when you're in a lock. And while Michael has handled the boat through a loop and a half and is absolutely capable of doing a lock by himself, it is not fun nor easy to do so. And I just feel a responsibility to be back up on the fly bridge with him when we're going through a lock. So there have been some calls I've interrupted. And, thankfully my team gets it. They know what I'm doing. They support what I'm doing. So it's really not that big of a deal. And depending on, a lot of people are interested in doing this while they're working virtually now. And it's very possible. It's just, I think your job has to be a bit flexible.
That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Kimberly Russo. Kimberly is the director of the American Great Loop Cruising Association. Now, you're going to find out more about the AGLCA in this interview. And it's an adventure that my husband and I dream of doing. So this is why it's so exciting to do this interview with Kim. She is currently living her own dream aboard a boat, navigating the Great American Loop. She's going to be sharing her wisdom and experience as a nomadic businesswoman. And I'm sure it's going to inspire you to chase your own dreams, whatever they might be. And especially if you dream of embracing a nomadic working lifestyle. Let's meet Kimberly Russo. Get ready to be inspired and motivated to set your own ideas into motion. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Kim. It is so great to have you with us today.
Yeah. Hey, Cammie, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and really honored that you asked.
And I am just honored that you're here, and I'm wanting to hear some of your story. And I thought I'd just kick off with, how you and I met. So you are the executive director of the America's Great Loop Cruising Association, so AGLCA. Right.
Yes.
And it's a seed that my husband and I got planted a few years back. And so we are actively thinking this would be something we would love to do, the Great American Loop. And
very exciting.
So, yeah, it is very exciting. So we got to meet in person at the rendezvous back in, what was that, May, June? I don't remember what the...
Early May. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was really, a lot of fun. And, over the course of, in this podcast, I've gone to interview women who are really living that nomadic life of, they're just living from different parts of the world. They're moving. And, certainly the Great American Loop is one of those ways that you can move around. And I know there's people, and you are one of those people working right now on the loop. So we'll get into some of that. And, I think this beauty of the digital world that we live in right now is just super cool. That's right. It's we have more flexibility to do our work from anywhere, and that's inspiring to me. And it's got me pretty jazzed up thinking about it from that perspective. So, and as you know, that my husband and I went to Trawler's Great Lakes in Grand Rapids City, or Traverse City Bay here just last month, where we spent a week on a larger boat, learning to maneuver it, getting our powerboat license, getting our powerboat cruising. It was inland waters cruising,
Hmm.
and the night operations cruising certification. So it was an intense week. It was so
Wow.
much learning, so
Adding the
much
night to that
learning.
is probably more than you've probably now done more night cruising than I've done.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And so we're both kind of hooked. We're both really hooked on this. So I want to hear your stories, and that's it's like we're moving down this pathway. We see it. When my husband can't work remotely, but I certainly can, and so he's got a few more years before he's in retirement space. So we're kind of lining our course up for that.
Yeah,
So
that's perfect.
as we get in, let's talk about. Well, tell us what the Great American Loop is. Just
Sure.
tell us
So
for our listeners.
basically, it is a 6,000-mile boat route that you take on your own boat. So when I say it's a cruise route, America's Great Loop cruisers, some people envision a cruise ship. It's not quite that. It's something you do on your own boat. You kind of follow it at your own pace. Like I said, 6,000 miles. It is mostly an inland protected waterway. So this is not an ocean crossing. You don't have to worry about, being out of touch for weeks at a time. You're kind of constantly going from port to port. So it takes you up the East Coast, and again, kind of on the intracoastal waterway that's protected, into Chesapeake Bay, then through New Jersey, often kind of on the outside in the ocean there, then into New York Harbor, which is a highlight for so many people, up
Totally.
through the Hudson River, into the historic canals of New York, most usually the Erie Canal. There's many route choices through there. That'll take you to the Great Lakes. You can spend some time in parts of the historic canals of Canada, almost the Canadian equivalent of the Erie Canal, called the Trent Severn Waterway. That brings you to Lake Huron and to onward to Lake Michigan, out through Chicago. So, another one of the nation's greatest cities by water, which is just a totally different way of exploring things. And then you come down the inland rivers. Most of us, and we are known as loopers if you are doing the Great Loop, take a route known as the Tenn-Tom route, which brings you to the Gulf of Mexico through Mobile instead of doing the entire length of the Mississippi, which is just not too pleasure boat friendly. And then you get to the Gulf of Mexico, go around Florida, and that kind of completes the loop. But you can
Yeah.
start from anywhere.
Yeah.
Typically wherever the boat is where you would start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
So
should
it's
probably mention it takes most people about roughly a year to do this. It has been done
yeah.
much more quickly than that, and it can be. But for most loopers, a lot of the journey is exploring the towns and really taking the time to kind
Oh,
of
totally.
savor the journey instead of just trying to
Yeah.
set a speed record.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat seasonal. Most people will be in Florida in the winter, Canada or anywhere on the Great Lakes in the summer because of the seasons. And you're typically heading up the East Coast in the spring, headed for the warm waters and warm weather in Canada in the summer. And then you're
Yeah.
coming back down the inland rivers in the fall. So
Yeah.
because of the temperatures and just what's open, the Great Lakes, all of the boating is pretty much closed down in the winter. So that makes it kind of seasonal, and that makes the year time frame work out pretty well for most people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool. It's so cool. And so, how did you become the executive director of the AGLCA?
Oh gosh. So it seems let me start by saying I think today I am 100% where I was always meant to be, but it was not a straight linear journey to get to here. I first learned about the Great Loop because my dad was a very active member. The people
Oh,
who
he
founded
was.
it, yeah, yep, and the people who founded it did so after doing the Great Loop and writing a book about it. So my dad was a pretty early active member and volunteer, and he was talking about the Great Loop, and my sister and I were probably in maybe our late 20s, and thinking dad had absolutely lost his mind. My mom was kind of the quintessential reluctant spouse for a very long time. She was not at all sure that this was something she wanted to do. And we just kept thinking, why does he want to be away from home and away from the grandchildren for a year and take mom on this journey? And after a period of time, the people who founded the association, they were a couple, Ron and Eva Staub, and they were getting a little bit more advanced in age, and they were really kind of ready to pass the association along to someone who had a little bit of more of an ability to help it grow, to help it thrive as it became more than they could really manage. And they knew that my parents had a business that they were running. My sister and I were actually running the day to day at that point, completely different, nothing to do with boating. So as part of that process of my parents kind of making it almost their retirement business, so to speak, the Stobbs came to our office outside of Charleston and walked us through their Great Loop, mostly in pictures. And I think I'm just more of a visual person.
Yep.
So instead of my dad's verbal description, when I saw their pictures, it just clicked and I really got it. And I kind of understood what they were doing. And in the beginning, it was a great way to keep mom and dad busy as they moved towards retirement. And as I said, my sister and I were kind of running the day-to-day. The company was in the telecom space. So like I said, completely different. And that company still exists. My sister is still running that part of the business. But I guess around 2015, my parents were really ready to step a little bit further back. I had been through a painful divorce followed by a battle with cancer and was just kind of looking for that. I don't want to go back into telecom sales for what I was doing. It just wasn't inspiring me. And I think I just didn't realize how absolutely bored I was with it until I really got the opportunity to work every day with loopers and with AGLCA. So it was around 2015 that I became the director. And it just seems like it's the perfect marriage of all of the different things that I enjoyed, but never really got a long time to spend on when I had what I call my previous career. But ultimately, I still work for the same company. As I said, my sister runs the other part of the business, and I run the AGLCA part, and we are co-owners, and it's
That's amazing.
women certified enterprise. So it's a lot of fun. It's
So
a great partnership.
Cool. Very, very cool. And so did your parents ever do the loop then?
So they did much of it together. They did trips out of Charleston frequently, and went as far south as Miami and as far north as New York City. They never did the whole thing together, but my dad did eventually finish it by crewing for other people, which is a completely different experience and a lot of fun experience as well. So he has earned his gold burgee, which is the club flag.
Awesome.
And once you have finished the whole route, you get to fly a gold one instead of a white one. So he's done it.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, so what a great story. I didn't know any of that background. So that's really fun.
Yeah, it's not something, when I'm talking strictly about the Great Loop, it's not something that's super relevant. But when we're talking about a podcast that's for women and also has a business angle to it, it kind of
Totally.
is, it's interesting background.
It's really pertinent. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. And you right now are on the Great Loop.
I am. Yes.
How did that come to be? And tell us more about, right now.
So I always thought that I would do the Great Loop eventually.
Eventually, right?
Eventually, right.
Yeah.
COVID kind of sped up the process, I think, for a lot of people because technology-wise, I think COVID made things like Zoom meetings more commonplace and made getting used to being connected to your team virtually instead of day-to-day a little bit easier. As I said, I was divorced and thought in my head, I'll do this myself. I don't have to be a couple. And there are women who have done it themselves. And one of them wrote a great book about it.
I read that book. And it was
Crossing the Wake.
I read the book and I was like, I'm not ever doing that by myself.
So, and Tanya Binford is the author, and she is fabulous. And kudos to her because I really thought, I could do this myself. And I read her book and went, and, the biggest drawback besides... she did have like an arm injury from trying to handle the boat herself. But beyond that, I think what really got me, she described seeing these amazing things and visiting these amazing places and not having somebody sitting there next to her to share it with. And that's what got me. So then I was kind of like, gosh, I don't know. I don't want to do it myself anymore. I don't know what I will do, but I figured I had plenty of time. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, Michael and I met. We are now aboard together. He had done a whole loop and a half before we became a couple. So he already had the boat. Now I had somebody to do it with. Bonus. I mean, a lot of people, I think shopping for the boat would be fun, actually. I missed that part of the Great Loop journey because the boat kind of landed here. Here it was. And there is a theory that... Right. And there is a theory that, the best boat for the Great Loop is the one you already have. So I took, that wholeheartedly. But so COVID passed. My youngest was still in high school during COVID. He was one of those kids who, missed proms and things like that.
Oh, man.
And he left for college. And Michael said, so let's go. And I thought, oh, am I really ready to do this? Like, there really honestly is nothing preventing this anymore.
Yeah.
And, so as the director of the association, Michael and I had never lived together before. Well, as I said, it was his boat. He had been on board for a year and a half. I'm sorry, he had done the loop 1.5 times. He had been on board for about 5 years without somebody else living with him. So now it's a confined space. It's living
Right.
aboard, and he has a pet parrot that she and I are not the best of friends. So I thought, oh Lord, how is this going to work out? And being the director of the association, if I made a big fuss that we're going to go do the Great Loop, and a couple months in, I was like, this is not working. It was going to be kind of a big ordeal. That would be bad for business. So we kind of very quietly left Charleston in fall, kind of late fall, right about the time, he left for college. We took a couple months, and
I love that you very quietly.
Yes. At that time of year, it's really not a good time to leave Charleston to start the Great Loop because you'd be heading north. The weather's getting colder. So we went south. And if you've experienced any part of the loop or heard about it, it's a pretty social trip because there's 300 or so roughly boats heading in the same direction at roughly the same pace. You're not necessarily traveling with somebody else, but you're seeing other loopers all the time. So it was kind of a great opportunity to leave Charleston when there was nobody else cruising the waterways so much, head south, and we went to Fort Myers for the winter. And the plan was to live aboard in Fort Myers for 3 months. And then, assuming this was all going well, we would leave Fort Myers at kind of the best time of year to leave Fort Myers, which was February. So February 2022, we left Fort Myers and started the Great Loop. So I am actually not quite finished with it. Hurricane Ian had other thoughts about that. Our plan was to return to Fort Myers in December of 2022. But in October, of course, Hurricane Ian destroyed much of Fort Myers in general, but the marinas in downtown Fort Myers just don't exist anymore post Ian. And they will be back, but they're not yet. So we kind of adjusted plan as is part of looping. Spent the winter in Panama City, got distracted there by some family things and made several trips home to Charleston, and eventually decided we wanted to spend the summer on the Tennessee River. So we have since turned around and went back up the rivers, and we are now sitting in Huntsville, Alabama, and my middle child lives here, so I get to spend some time with him. Nice. And towards the end of the summer, we will cruise all the way up the Tennessee River, which is considered a side trip on the Great Loop, and it's a place I've never cruised. So really looking forward to that. And in the fall, we'll come back south and officially what we call cross my wake when we get back to Fort Myers. And at this point, we're guessing that's going to be sometime in November, but we don't know yet.
Oh my gosh. So amazing. Yeah. So amazing.
It's been amazing.
Goosebumps.
It's been really
beautiful.
amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how has it changed you? What's, what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know back then?
So I have definitely learned to just kind of relax into it. Not everything is going to go the way I planned or on my schedule. And I just have to accept that. We are not going to travel in bad weather just because there's someplace we want to be or something we're trying to get to. And that's what we encourage all loopers to do. So, for somebody who has kind of lived by the clock, it is, a little bit different to try and just, as I said, kind of breathe into it and accept the fact that I don't ultimately have control over how this day is going to go.
Well, and just what a great lesson, even just for entrepreneurs in general, right? And
it's a great lesson
on that.
Yes,
like
and it's a lesson I needed. It is a lesson I needed for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's also, I have a team of 4 that work with me. We are all remote now. At one time, we were all in our office outside of Charleston. One of our team members moved to Phoenix and still is part of the team. One moved to Wisconsin and is still part of the team. And the 4th is still in Charleston.
So all virtual.
But so we were operating remotely and virtually anyway.
Yeah.
But it's, I try as a women business owner, I try to hold myself to a pretty high standard with my team. That was a little bit more challenging because we're looping. So we have great technology. We have Starlink that keeps us connected. Starlink does not always work when you're in a lock. And while Michael has handled the boat through a loop and a half and is absolutely capable of doing a lock by himself, it is not fun nor easy to do
No.
so. And I
No,
just feel a
much better.
responsibility to be back up on the flybridge with him when we're going through a lock. So there have been some calls I've interrupted. And, thankfully my team gets it. They know what I'm
Yeah.
doing. They support what
Yeah.
I'm doing. So it's really not that big of a deal. And depending, a lot of people are interested in doing this while they're working virtually
Yeah.
now. And it's very possible. It's just, I think your job has to be a bit flexible and you have to be, we do stay in port many
On
days. Most
certain
loopers
days.
travel on average like 1 out of every 3 days when you average it all out. There's certain sections where there's not a lot to see. So you might travel every single day for 2 weeks and then you might get someplace that's wonderful and you might stay a week. But on average, 1 out of every 3 days is what they're traveling. So if you can
And
kind
that's
of
a question
use
I
those off
have.
days, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about, when we do this, I do, I plan to be still continuing to serve my clients and, work with my team. So I've got that balance of both clients and team that I'll be,
Yes.
planning for. And I think what I'll do is I'll say, these are client days. This is when
Yep.
I'm working with clients. Team can be more flexible, I think.
Yeah.
But I think is there any words of wisdom on that?
I think it can definitely work, especially if you can keep the rest of your schedule open. And what I mean by that is Michael also works. He has to travel to be places face to face with his clients. So
Okay.
that was kind of an extra challenge because we had to be
Yeah.
places that he could fly out
So
of.
you're both doing it. So you're both having to kind of
So
manage
that was a
the
bit of a
two
challenge.
people.
So there were days that, I might have a call that it would be better if we just stayed put, but perhaps, we've only got 3 days to get to
get
a
to
next
somewhere.
place and there's weather predicted or whatever it might be. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you can set aside, and I've had members who have said, Tuesdays and Thursdays are work days where I schedule the things that it's not going to be, conducive to be going through a lock during these.
Yeah.
And you can work the other days along the way, but, meetings are Tuesdays and Thursdays and you just plan to be tied up somewhere for those. And it can absolutely work.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah.
We're probably 4 years out. So, but it's really, I got really clear a few years ago, or actually last year, it was last fall, creating a business that is of the energy that it can live on a boat. And I like that. That's exciting, right? It's like, and that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur is we get to define what our businesses are and how we're growing them, how we're evolving them, and what's, the energy of our business. So
Exactly.
yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah, totally exciting. So what are some of the things outside of your comfort zone that the loop has forced you to do?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest thing that I tell people is it really does force you outside of your comfort zone repeatedly. And that's okay. And I think as we age, that's actually a good thing.
I
I would
totally
certainly rather be experiencing new things that maybe are outside my comfort zone than sitting at home, in a rocking chair on the front porch.
Yeah.
As lovely as that kind of quiet time is, I have really enjoyed being pushed. And it's things like, docking the boat. And as you found out, probably, Cammie, it's not really like driving a car.
It's not.
You can't
And
stop on a dime.
driving,
You can't.
Yeah, it's not like driving our 21-foot Sea Ray either. It's like
Right.
so much more difficult, right?
Right. So it's intimidating for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
Totally.
But it's been fun to learn how to do it, and it's a success. When you push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit, you get to have those moments of success when it goes
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And you get to also have those moments when it doesn't go so well, but then you get to debrief and say, okay, where did I go wrong? What can I learn from this? And it's a constant process of little wins, little failures perhaps, but learning from those, and then the next one's a win. So I think I'm super lucky that Michael can operate the boat himself because he's completely non-pressure. Like, I'll just go do it. You stay on your call. And I'm kind of like, no, I really want to do it. And,
That stretch is good for us.
it's so good for us. And, that coupled with the just breathe. If you can't do a call when you're supposed to do a call, people will understand, and Michael regularly says to me when I'm like, oh my gosh, this went wrong. I was supposed to be here. Did anybody die?
Yeah.
Is how he says it. And I'm like, okay, you're right. We're not saving lives. it all works out. That sounds
Yeah.
kind of coy a little bit, but it just seems to, uh, in today's world, people understand life.
Yeah.
Everything is not all business, and people understand that there's other things that you want to experience. And, I'm fortunate that doing the loop is very in tune with my job.
Yeah.
But I think others can have that same
Yeah.
success. And people that I've talked to who are working aboard, whether it's aboard a boat or doing some other nomadic kind of lifestyle,
Yeah.
are really finding that they don't have to confine themselves to a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday schedule. They can have
Yeah.
some time that's within kind of the normal boundaries of a workday,
Yep.
but they can be off doing other things the rest of the time and make up those hours where they can. And I did a lot of that on the loop,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, where working evenings or weekends, weekends really kind of ceased to exist. Which
Uh-huh.
is also fine, because there may have been some days during the week that we were in a really cool town and I really just wanted to spend the day exploring instead of sitting at my laptop. So
Yeah.
as long as you've got some flexibility and some control over your schedule, it's a great lifestyle.
Yeah, I love it. So back on that stretch. Finding those
Mm-hmm.
places that we stretch into. I mean, it's again, we're doing that every day as entrepreneurs. We're always stretching
Yes.
into new spaces and doing things in a different way. And I think that practicing that muscle of the stretch can, no matter how we're doing it. I mean, it's like every year finding new things to do, to learn. And I know, when we were up at Trawler Great Lakes with Jay Craft, we were at this I was in this space of, oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable, this is good, right? And then also just to not judge ourselves in a beginner state, against compare
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to somebody who's been doing something for years. So
Right.
when we took the boat by ourselves for the first time, we got to the next marina to dock the boat, and my husband Tim was driving the boat, but it was still, there was like, it was stressful, and there was all of the stress that, kind of comes along with that.
Yeah.
And I caught myself in my mind of just being, oh, we could have done this better, we could have done that better, and then it was like, no, wait a minute, this was the first time we docked this larger trawler boat all by ourselves without a
Yeah.
captain on board, and we did pretty darn good. And the next time we did it even better. So it is that growth that we can find when we put ourselves in places of being uncomfortable. The stretch, the growth that can come along with that is really beautiful. And I think when we're practicing that, when we're utilizing that muscle, we get better at doing it in all things life.
I agree. And I think it was actually a member who, as I said, it's kind of a social trip, and we ended up at a marina early on in our journey, with a few other looper boats, and we had all went to a nearby restaurant for dinner. And it was one of the other women who said to me, he doesn't understand why I cry every day. And I finally told him that I've been living outside my comfort zone for 2 months now. And I looked at her and I thought, that's exactly it. I really didn't have the word for it before then. And I think, obviously, conceptually, I understood the Great Loop. And we had been living aboard, for several months before we actually started. But the day to day, moving the boat, which is something new, docking the boat, which,
In
it
a new
comes with a lot
place.
of things. In a new place,
Yeah.
different water, different current. Yeah, every time you're docking that boat, there's so many things to consider: the wind, the current, the fact that you are in a marina you've never been to before, so you don't know where the slip is or which side of the boat you're tying up to. So it's 100 things, and I, like I said, I had a very good concept, obviously, of what the Great
Yeah.
Loop was, but until you actually go there and do each of those things, it is outside your comfort zone until it becomes routine, and it takes a while. And then once it becomes routine, I realized, yes, that's exactly what it was. I was outside of my comfort zone, and I kind of liked it.
I like that.
So then we started kind of switching roles. And, for me, being the director of the association, I never, made any bones about the fact that I had not done the loop. Never said that, that this was my first time. Never, tried to hide the fact that I was new out there, but I still felt a certain amount of
Yeah,
pressure
totally.
to be good at
Yeah.
these things. So when you're docking, and it never fails, if the weather's bad and you're trying to dock and there's a lot of wind, it's out of the graciousness of their hearts, but all of a sudden loopers will appear from everywhere to try and catch your lines and help you. And you're like, oh gosh, if I hit the dock, I really just wish nobody was here watching. So Michael would always do those tough dockings. And it was actually nice to see him, who has a lot of experience and is a licensed captain and all the things, have a couple of challenging dockings, because it made me realize that that's okay. Yeah. You can have a lot of experience and it still doesn't always go the way that you want it to go. And I don't know if you got to experience this in your training, but backing the boat in was always my when I can comfortably back the boat in, then I will know that I've got this.
I would definitely go in my head for that one right now. I'd be like, I would definitely be all up in my head on that. We did it, but
it was, and it's a challenge, and most of the time, quite honestly, Michael does drive the boat, because a lot of times I'm working on my laptop while he's driving the boat, and I'm helping him, with navigation or whatever when he needs it. But I do spend a lot of that time working, so I don't get all of the chances to drive the boat that I would like to get. So the first time I backed it in, we pulled into a marina in Wisconsin, and in the middle of Milwaukee, and for whatever reason, nobody was there. It was a little tiny marina. There were maybe 12 slips in this public park, and there were no other boats there. And we pulled in, Michael did it, and I was like, wait a minute. This is like my great chance to do this without an audience. Pull this boat back out. And I backed it in, and I did it a couple of times, and it was a great chance to practice. And I've practiced some since then. I'm not comfortable with it yet, but I'm getting there. And that's kind of like the last close quarters maneuvering thing that I don't feel 100% comfortable with. But you know what? We ended up we were here in Huntsville at a marina for a couple of months, and we have to move the boat to pump out the holding tank, which for those of you who are not RVers or boaters, most marinas, you can't just hook up your septic. You actually have a holding tank, and that has to be emptied. And a lot of Florida marinas where people stay there for a long time can do that right at the slip, but they can't here. So we have to move the boat every, roughly once a week. But this is great opportunity. Yeah. Once a week at minimum, I do it. It's a short trip. We're just going over there to the pump out station. So it's a great chance for me to practice those close quarter maneuvering skills, taking the boat over. I run while the pump out is happening. I do not stick around and wait for that, because I'm still very fearful that is something will go wrong. And I do not need to experience something going wrong, because I probably will never get back aboard the boat with the pump out. And there are stories about that some captain friends have shared with me, which is probably why I do not like to stick around while they're pumping that out. Yeah. But driving the boat, this is, it's my summer to finish the skills that I have acquired and just want to fine tune. So it's a great opportunity.
That's awesome. I think the lesson I took away on just maneuvering in tight quarters when we were up in Michigan was just how important the pause was, and the come to a stop between maneuvers. And it was like coming to the stop between the forward in gear, reversing gear, and it was like the pivot was happening, but the pause. And again, that was I'm always in this mode of looking for, okay, what's the lesson to learn here? It's like the pause. Of course, the pause in life, the pause in when we're doing our work. Absolutely. The pause is so important. And it's just it's something that I can viscerally feel in my body now. The pause. When I think about pause for something else, I'm going back to that, how important that was, and how that worked well in maneuvering in a tight space. So anyway, that was my lesson.
So true. And I love that you said that, because the pause it's kind of similar to, when I say, to breathe into the idea that I can't control that. It's kind of like I need to pause and remind myself. And that is part of the close quarters maneuvering that Michael reminds me all the time.
Yeah. And to stay calm. Right?
He'll say, stop your forward motion. I can hear him saying it right now. Stop. And he has to say it repeatedly, because I always forget. I'm still moving forward so slowly, and I want to start my turn. But you just stop your forward motion first. And that's exactly what you said. It's that pause that makes it go smoother. And I also love my favorite, and this is out there a lot in the boating community, but just don't go any faster than you want to hit something. Yeah. Which totally makes sense too.
And we can take that right back into the world of entrepreneurship too, right? It's the pauses, the don't go so fast you're going to hit something. It's like, really ground yourself, be in that calm space. And that was some of my lessons I took away from that. Okay, this is so much fun.
Sounds like you had a good instructor.
I did have a very good. Captain Mike was amazing. So where can people follow your journey on the loop, connect with you?
So there are videos on the association's YouTube channel that kind of show my whole route so
Oh,
far.
cool.
So if you go to youtube.com/Great Loop,
Uh-huh.
there is a playlist there that's Great Loop cruising information. And that playlist is actually leg by leg. So
Oh gosh, I didn't
each
know
time
that.
we
Cool.
moved the boat from point A to point B, yeah, we actually took your navigation system creates a GPX file that you can then upload to Google Earth. So the result is kind of a flyover video where you can see the route itself
so cool.
with some narration and some other video and pictures of what it looks like. So that's a great place. The greatloop.org website is tons of information. And then we have a pretty active social media, mostly on Facebook. That's where our demographic tends to hang out these days. So yeah, lots of resources there, whether you're a member or not, whether you are interested in the Great Loop or just looking for some kind of nomadic lifestyle type information. There's a lot
And
there.
you've got a great podcast that I listen to all the time.
That's the other thing that struck me, like some similarities here. Mine is called the Great Loop Radio Podcast, where yours is, of course, Extraordinary Women Radio. And you've been doing this for a long time,
I have,
right?
It's 6 years.
Yeah, so, and ours, our podcast has been, I think it's 10 or 12 now.
gosh.
And actually, my parents started it when they were still running the association.
They were
and,
right on the edge of podcasting.
my dad is, well, and it wasn't really even called a podcast at the time, which I think is where the radio part came from. But, it fits. I don't think they realized at the time that they were doing a podcast.
Yeah.
I think they just came across, my dad's always kind of been that kind of a step ahead technologically, advanced thinking. So yeah, but that similarity also struck me. And I didn't know what you did until after the rendezvous, didn't, know about your business. And then we were chatting about, one of the features I think I used on a PowerPoint, and saw your website and got so interested and engaged. In fact, I'm attending your session tomorrow.
Oh, yay.
And I've listened to your podcast. So it's exciting for me to be here with you.
Well, it's exciting to have you here. Okay, the final question I always close with are, what are 3 pearls of wisdom you want to leave with us today?
Oh, gosh. I should have been ready for that one, right? Since you like to close with that. The comfort zone thing is big. Don't be afraid to get outside your comfort zone. And I think one is to just really don't be afraid to follow the path where it leads you, because that's how I ended up where I'm supposed to be. I feel like some people are very successful with very intentionally setting the course before them and following that course. And mine was more of a, almost accidental journey. But the culmination of the various experiences I had over, all of the previous parts of my life really fits so well with what I do today. And it really was a journey that was probably meant to happen exactly the way it did, but it certainly didn't feel at the time like a mindful decision to take this course. So, don't be afraid to see where the path leads you, even if it's not where you expect it to be, is probably a second one. And then a third one is, don't be afraid of looking silly, because I think I spent a good portion, the first part of our loop, very worried about that. Very worried about how other members would perceive me being there, even though they knew I didn't have the experience, but I was putting pressure on myself that I should be good at this.
Yeah.
And that was an extra pressure I really did not need to be putting on myself. And I also, it's like I said, it's a very social trip. People talk about docktails. And I also kind of had a fear of, I am working full-time plus. We've got to move the boat, and that takes time. It takes time away from work. And I want to see these places that we're going. So, when something had to give, sometimes it was that social aspect. So I also spent a lot of time worrying about how that was perceived by other members. Were they thinking I was too snobby or just didn't want to participate with the group? And ultimately, none of that mattered to anyone but me. And it took me a while to realize that. So I think the third one is really just like, and it sounds so cliche at this point, but you do you. If you crash the boat into a dock, there's 40 other people who did that this week too. If you can't go to a social thing, because you're working, there's other people that are going just because they don't feel like it, and nobody minds. Nobody cares. Everybody's out here doing this trip of a lifetime and having this adventure of a lifetime. And they're all just doing what they want to do too. So they're really not concerned at all about what you're doing. And I think that translates also into the greatest successes in life, or when you just do you instead of what you perceive people expect.
Yeah.
So and these are things that I'm still learning, and I've mostly just learned these pearls of wisdom in the last year or so while we've been on the loop. So it's been such a great journey.
All the more reason to
I've
go
grown
adventure
in so
like
many
that.
ways.
All the more reason to go adventure
Exactly.
like that, because it's
Absolutely.
if we're, like you said, if we're sitting in a rocking chair somewhere, we're not growing and expanding, and so there's so much growth to find.
Exactly.
So, well, Kim, this has been a
Exactly.
blast. I've had so much fun hearing your stories and getting to know you a little bit more.
Oh, me too.
And so thank you so much.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you for having me, and thanks for all you do to promote women entrepreneurship.